This is Join Us in France, episode 236. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and this is a podcast about all things French. You see, I was born and raised in France, but moved away at age 21 and lived in the US until I was 40. When I moved home to France, I realized I didn't know my own country very well, and I went on a bit of a journey of rediscovery. And then I thought, why not do a podcast about that? And here I am talking into a microphone and giving you also the microphone because it turns out my listeners know a lot about France as well. On today's episode, the interview is about the cider route in Normandy. I didn't know much about this besides, the normal background information I have just from growing up in France. But then Ria Wincolor, who knows all about cider all over the world, reached out to me and suggested we might do an episode together. And I thought this was a brilliant idea, so there it is. Ria is also a podcast producer. She has a podcast about cider. When I tell you that there's a podcast about everything, this is an example. A podcast about cider called Cider Chat, and I recommend you check it out. Ria also offers cider-themed tours, including one coming up in the fall in Normandy. Check that out on her website, ciderchat.com. It looks like a lot of fun. This week was the 75th anniversary of D-Day, and if you were in France for the D-Day celebrations, going on a visit to the cider route would have been a great addition to your trip, besides seeing the Mont Saint-Michel and, of course, all the D-Day places that are wonderful to visit. But we'll get to that in a second. After my chat with Ria, I'll tell you about a new scam I didn't know about from a listener in Portland who alerted me to it. And I will also tell you about big changes coming to the electric scooters in Paris. If you're interested in this episode, I recommend you go check out all the other episodes about Normandy. There are 10 more at this point. I will list them on the show notes for this episode, which you will find at joinusinfrance.com/236, the number 236. Bonjour, Ria, and welcome to Join Us in France.
Bonjour, Annie. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
So this episode is very different from anything I've done before because we are both going to release the same episode where we talk about cider in Normandy.
Well, that's fine by me because I can't get enough cider in Normandy. So having two more is perfect.
How come? Why the cider? Why?
Cider, I've been involved in cider in the U.S. For 25 years, primarily because of the region that I'm in Massachusetts, is where the cider focus in the U.S. and really its impact worldwide was felt. I'm part of Franklin County Cider Days, and I began teaching cider making 25 years ago. And that passion has continued forward. And so many years later, I realized, I have a bit of info. People are kind of hot on the cider trail. Why don't I start sharing my knowledge, my connections, and now, like you as a podcaster of welcoming people to France, I went to cider.
Excellent. And how old is your podcast? I think you've been doing it for a long time, right?
Yes, I'm in my fourth season. I just released episode 182. So, yeah, it's a weekly podcast.
Wow. Yeah, I'm a little further ahead than you. I'm on 234. So this episode will probably 235, 236, something like that. So yeah, we've been at this a long time, both of us. It's just that I talk about France destinations and you talk about cider. So, but cider is interesting to me because I know a lot of people want to do wine touring in France, but of course in Normandy there is no wine.
That region is just renowned, just like Bordeaux is really renowned for grapes, Normandy and Brittany are renowned for their apples specific for cider and their pears specific for cider making too. So
Right.
not too much. Yeah. And now on your podcast, I know I've really referred to your podcast quite a bit for the folks who are going to France. I mean, France is such a wonderful country because each region has so much diversity, so much specific products for that region and sights to see. It's almost like the podcast just could go on forever.
Probably.
Because there's so much that you share. And you do share quite a bit.
Yes. And what I like to do is to have conversations with people. It's not a produced show at all. I don't, I just talk with people and I ask them how their visit went and what they liked and what they didn't like and what they recommend and that sort of thing. And it's very fun because some of the time I have been to these places and sometimes I haven't. But I'm just like my listeners. I want to find out. I'm curious. That's how it works for me anyway.
Well, shall we talk a little bit about cider then? And I could share with you a little part of France that I've been able to discover. And it sounds like you haven't really been in Normandy.
Some.
At least in the search.
Yeah, some. But I mean, I've been to the big, I've been to Bayeux, I've been to Caen, I've been to Mont-Saint-Michel, obviously, a few times. But Lisieux, for instance, I've never been. I was just reading up about it. And the Honfleur, I've never been. I know it's gorgeous and that everybody raves about it, but I can see the photos. It does look gorgeous. Actually, one of the photos I use as the header for joinusinfrance.com is Honfleur. So, it's gorgeous. I need to go, but yeah, one of these days. It's kind of far away because I live in Toulouse, so for me to drive all the way to Normandy, like to those areas, it would probably take me a good 10-hour drive.
Right. And I think a lot of Parisians will go out to Honfleur. At least it's known that way because it's about 2.5 hour drive, maybe a little bit more, probably depending upon traffic.
Right.
And for Lisieux, people could take a train to Lisieux, although if you're going to be doing any kind of traveling about in Normandy, you really need to have your own car.
You do.
You can't do it any other way.
Yeah, this is something I've pointed out in all the episodes about Normandy is this is not a place where you can use public transportation. I did an episode about how people can go to the Mont-Saint-Michel on a day trip from Paris, but it's really not. As a day trip, it's a bad idea. But you can go to the Mont-Saint-Michel by train. I suggest you stay overnight, but that's a different thing.
That would be really taxing, I think. And I think when I'm traveling, and I'm sure you probably agree, I try to minimize the amount of travel time and to take a pace so you can really take in the exquisite countryside of Normandy and of all of France.
That's right. That's
the way to do it.
And driving in France is really not that difficult once you understand a few basics. And I've done several episodes about driving in France. There's a whole category on my website where I've discussed driving in France with different people. And I used to teach driving in France, too, years ago. This is before I left for the U.S. And so I have a good idea of, what Americans find a little startling about driving in France. But driving in Normandy, honestly, it's pretty easy.
It is easy. The only kind of catch is if you are tasting cider, that brings in a different factor into drive.
Yeah, you need a driver.
So, that's why I lead tours to Normandy so that people could just be, totally into cider and not even have to think about that driving part.
That's right. They can just enjoy it.
Yeah, that's the way to just dive right into it. And because there is just so much richness in terms of cider and Poré and Calvados.
So tell us a little bit about, so you mentioned that this area is famous for growing the pears and the apples for the cider, right?
Correct. And what that is about, Annie, is just like I'm going to keep on referring to Bordeaux because that's kind of a good example. With wine, well, cider is made much like wine, but essentially it is fermented apple juice.
Mm-hmm.
So in the U.S., you might remember when people were given fresh apple juice, at least in my region of New England, because of Prohibition and all that, that kind of ended cider for quite a while until more recently. And so people would call that cider. And now in the U.S., we also kind of call it hard cider. It's a little confusing in that way.
Right.
But in essence, as in Bordeaux, there's specific regions in the world that really lend itself for making cider.
Mm-hmm.
And that is also true for grapes. So there's specific apple varieties, just like you have grapes that you eat and grapes for making wine. The same is true with cider apples that you wouldn't necessarily want to be munching down on them because they have bittersweet and bitter sharp profiles to it that are excellent for bringing out tannins into the cider. And the same is true for the pears. There's eating pears and fermenting pears.
Right. And it's the same with wine, with grapes.
Right, and it has to do with... Correct. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's why everybody there is making cider, and they're distilling it into Calvados, and Calvados is it's at that same level as cognac, but cognac has really taken the swing. You see a lot of cognac in the U.S., but you don't see too much Calvados. You really want to go to Normandy to hunt down the Calvados, and that's part of the fun. To explore, discover. Yeah.
So you actually, where do you take your tour? I mean, your visitors when you drive them around Normandy on your cider route. Where do you take them?
Well, we typically meet in Paris first. Again, because I always try to slow down that time, and then we leave from Paris and return to Paris, and that seems to make quite a bit of sense. So when we arrive in Normandy, we're ready to go and start sipping and walking about the orchards. So our first destination that we did last year, we went out to the Route du Cidre. A cider in France is spelled differently. It's Cidre.
Right, cidre.
And in cidre.
Yeah.
And in English, it's Cider. And so we head out to Route du Cidre, and that is about 40 kilometers. Oh. So it's not a huge area.
Right.
But the truth is, cider is all around Normandy. That's just one particular area.
Right, so they've designated that area as Route du Cidre, but you find cider everywhere in Normandy.
That's right. And it's made by farmers, and then there's different kind of levels of producers making that.
Right. I remember, this is a funny story, and I think I might have shared it before on the podcast, but years and years and years ago, I was on a summer camp, and my parents chose a summer camp in Normandy, and this camp, actually, I think technically we were in Brittany because we were much further west than Lisieux and all of that. But I don't even remember because I was only 10 or something. And this camp was a cycling camp. And I had this little friend and we weren't very sporty and we weren't very fast. And so we would always drag behind the rest of the group. And we ran out of water. So we walked into one of these little farmhouses and asked for water. And the lady was so nice to us, she actually sat us down in her kitchen, and she gave us a glass of cider and some cookies. And then she filled up our water. And I thought, these people are wonderful. I want some more of that. So the next farm, what do? I throw out my water, and we go, we ran out of water. And same thing. They gave us a glass of cider and a cookie. And by the end of the afternoon, we were somewhat, buzzed. So that's my memory of cider. But they weren't giving us the hard cider because in Normandy they do cider for kids and cider for grown-ups, right?
Yes, and the cider for kids would not be fermented, so it would have no alcohol in it.
Oh, it has
but
some.
It sounds like you were.
Oh, it has some.
Oh.
Yeah. Le cidre doux in France has like 2% alcohol, and the cidre brut has like 5 or 6% alcohol. At least that's what I'm used to.
Yes, you're correct, and I'm kind of taking like the more American approach that the children would just be given the fresh pressed apple juice, which is at all the cideries.
Yeah, that's not what they were giving us. They were giving us the cidre doux, which tastes sweet and has a little bit of alcohol. So if you drink enough of it, like we were, you definitely get a buzz, especially if you're 10.
And that's what's lovely about that is typically the French are drinking cider as kind of accompaniment to crepes. Not like in the rest of the world or in the U.S. specifically, we have it for dinner, we have it for lunch.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting that way.
Yeah, you do. You order un pichet de cidre with your crêpe. Yeah, that's totally what we do. I don't drink cider very frequently, but if I go to a crêperie, that's what I order.
Yes, and it's changing even in France, which has such a deep tradition into cider and the way it's made, and there's the appellation control for that region. It is starting to change, and you're seeing the classic French Normandy farmhouse style cider, the ones that you mentioned, but also now it's going more towards, some of the producers at least are making it more as a wine style of cider that's a bit more drier and doesn't have that kind of farmy funk to it, which I love. The first thing I land in France, and I have to have a classic 750 ml bottle of that Normandy Cider Doux, Cider Bouche, it's so unique. Yeah. So unique to France.
Yeah, it's very good.
But it is changing.
I even saw a place there's a place, I think we were in the Basque country. I can't remember for sure. But we were in this restaurant with a big choir group. So we had booked the entire restaurant. And what they had a big old barrel, and they had a waiter who would cork the barrel, but then if you approached with your glass, he would uncork it, and you had to aim your glass to pick up the cider. And by the end of dinner, nobody could aim right. It was ridiculous, because we kept drinking that stuff like it was water. It was terrible.
Yeah, and sometimes you're all sharing the same glass too, which is the classic way that they in the Basque region, and also a little to the south is Asturias, and they have a cider festival every single night in that regional world. They make cider differently there. Mm-hmm. They really inform the rest of the world. For Normandy, most of the makers that I know there, they credit Asturias and the Basque region for cider, and then it kind of came up the coast, went over to England, and kind of the apples just started rolling out of Kazakhstan and went around the world.
I didn't know that. See, I mean, I experienced it, but I didn't know the reason behind it. I just like, you're in a group, everybody's having cider. Okay, give me some.
Well, I think you hit upon the one thing that I love about cider, and that it is fun.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
It's fun.
Because it's not so strong that you're going to be, drunk quickly. Like, I mean, most of us can have a fairly big portion of cider without being tipsy. With wine, and definitely with Calvados, I would be under the table in 5 seconds.
Well, that's a good point, because with cider, it's typically in France, it's half if you have a full glass of cider, it's half the amount of alcohol percentage as a glass of wine. So a glass of wine anywhere in the world is around 11 to 13%.
Yeah.
And for cider, Americans are making it 8.5%, but in France, you're classically seeing around 6% as being the highest that you would see.
Right. And when it has that level of alcohol in France, usually it's not very sweet. I mean, it's not super dry either. But you mentioned that maybe they're starting to make it more dry, but the ones I've had is
you'll find different things going on there, and we're even seeing some makers in France taking a little bit of lead from the Americans and adding what you might call an adjunct to the cider. One is hops, believe it or not, because the apple is so inviting to so many different profiles and spices. I mean, Americans put coffee into cider and ferment that along with the cider.
Oh, wow.
They put in hibiscus flowers, peppercorns. I mean, the sky is the limit with cider, whereas with wine or even beer, there's kind of it's been going fast in the world, but cider has just exploded in the best way possible onto people's and consumers' line of sight because it's so inviting for so many profiles. You're not seeing that too much in France. It's such a traditional country in that way, and that's the beauty of it. But at the same time, they're opening the door and saying, oh, what's the rest of the world doing? And that's just the way of the world, isn't it?
That's good. That's good. That shows that they want to keep up. I mean, if people are starting to flavor their cider with hibiscus flowers, why not? Try it.
Yeah, right. Why not? Exactly. Yeah. I'm not sure everybody would agree, but, I'm of that same mind. Why not go for it, explore it? Yeah. But my main goal is to really go and to taste specific cider varieties. Like one type of cider might be made with just one or two apples varieties, and that's the beauty of it. And Pays d'Auge has they have an apple called Calvados.
Okay, yes.
That was brought up, I guess it was on a ship coming up from Spain, and it went off the coast, and they, salvaged it and got the apple off of that ship, if I'm remembering that story correctly. And now that's used specifically for making Calvados. So not all apples are even used to make cider. They'll make cider first, and then they'll distill it to make Calvados. It's so fascinating.
I see. So it's the same, so they crush it some more for the Calvados or something?
Well, the way they make Calvados is they begin with the cider, and again, they're going to just use specific apple varieties. Then they'll just allow it to ferment, and then they'll distill it. But they're just looking for very specific apples for that Calvados blend. Distilled.
So when they make cider, this is me being an ignoramus, but when I have made apple juice in the past, and the way I made it was it was like a funky contraption that would have water on the bottom that heated up the apples but didn't penetrate anywhere near the apples, and then the apples would start boiling, and there was a spigot where the apple juice would come out of. Is that pretty much how they make apple juice to make cider later?
No, it's not.
Okay.
I do know that contraption that you're talking about. For cider, across the board, there is no heat.
Okay, so it's a crushing. Okay.
Yeah. Have you ever seen, when you were in Normandy, these big round, it's called a dégage, I believe, and it's a
Can you spell that?
Circle. I think it's D''Guage. Okay. Dégage. That's how they told me they would say, and this is what was before modern technology came, and they'd throw the apples in this circle, and a big wheel would go around, often pulled by a horse or a donkey or mule, I guess, and crush the apples. And then they take those apples and put it into a press. A lot of time, the press back then, they were using a combination of different straws that they'd wrap up the cider in and then press it in this big giant wooden press. And you'll see those beautiful round circular apple crushing circles at the Musée de Paris and different cideries, and they'll put flowers in it. They'll only use it now for really like demonstration, like historical demonstrations. But that's part of the history of it,
Interesting.
You got to start somewhere. Yeah. How do you crush an apple? You need some a whole bunch of apples too to make juice.
Yeah, you do need a lot. So let's talk about the towns that you hit on this tour.
Yeah. So on the tour that I do, we have gone to Lisieux because that's very close to the Route du Cider. But a lot of folks listening to join us in France and who have heard, about cheeses, they'll know the cheese Camembert.
Yeah.
But there is a town that is kind of spelled like Camembert, but it's Cambremer. It's Cambremer.
Yeah.
And that's right in the heart of the Route du Cider. And in that area, there's just a whole flurry of cideries. And these are producers who are very used to doing tours.
Oh.
And they'll have a tasting room, and you could set up a tour, you could do a tasting, and they'll have cider products such as, the Cidre Bouche, and then they'll have Pommeau, which is a blend of cider and Calvados, and then they'll also sell Calvados. And so, like one, let's go. Yes.
Yeah, I just you mentioned Cidre Bouche. So what is that?
Yes.
Is that like a cider that's not from a barrel, but in a bottle?
It's in a bottle. Yeah.
Okay.
It's in a bottle. A lot of I could get really technical, and I don't want to kind of overwhelm listeners. So it's almost like you got to go to Normandy to kind of know all the different ways that they make cider there. But they will use the champagne method for making cider.
Oh.
And that's really a trademark name for the French. But that's bottle conditioning to create the bubbles. So for winemaking, you make your initial wine from the grapes, and they store the bottles upside down during that initial fermentation. So they make the wine, they put it in a bottle, and it's stored upside down, and there's sediment in that bottle that they'll do what's called riddling. They'll turn the bottle,
Right.
a little turn. And then that plug will go to the top of the bottle. They'll freeze that end. They'll take the cork out. There's just enough pressure because there's been some, residual sweetness in that bottle to continue fermenting. They'll throw out that plug. They'll put a cork in and let it bottle condition. And then you'll get these exquisite small little bubbles in a bottle conditioned bottle of cider or that champagne method.
Okay.
And that's
the Cidre Bouche.
Yeah, you'll get that in Cidre Bouche, but you might see some people who are forced carbonating, and then you're going to have a larger bubble. That's the difference between bottle condition and forced carbonation. The bubbles are really of a different size.
Oh.
The champagne bubbles are very small and delicate.
Right.
And it throws off bouquet.
You're right. There is a lot to this.
Yeah. It's using a traditional method in Pédoge. Yeah.
Okay.
It's just a cider. It's just like a cider under a cork.
Okay.
And that's what that means, right? So
yeah, bouche just means there's a cork.
And it's just a delightful cider. I mean, you just get a bottle of that. You have some wonderful French bread and some nice soft cheeses, and you can go out into the orchard and just take in Normandy, just really breathe it in. I'd like to recommend to both our listeners a great times to go to Normandy. I would recommend to really experience the apples and pears is blossom season, which just ended, I believe, in Normandy.
Right.
It was like last week happening. And that's a wonderful time to just see the countryside. I mean, let's face it, May is beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is it blooming where you are right now?
Oh, it has been. But this May is particularly rainy all over France. And so, yeah, this year you would have run, especially in Normandy, you would have run into a lot of rain. Even Toulouse was pretty rainy this year, so which is unusual for us.
Yeah, that's the same true in New England where I am. So I like leading my cider tours in the fall. So I have a tour set up for the last week of September, and I've been going the last week of September to Normandy because I always find, and you know, knock on wood, it's always sunny, and the best part is the apples and pears are on the trees.
Right.
So you could actually taste that apple or pear, even the ones that you're not going to fully munch down on. You could get a little bit of the taste, and then when you're drinking the product that's made from it, the cider that's made from it, it really brings you deeper into the bottle, and that's an absolute joy because there's some varieties that are growing in Normandy and Brittany that you don't see anywhere in the world, and they should only be grown in that region because they work so well with that soil. And that's part of the fascination. It's a really farm to table product, and boy, love it.
Yeah.
So I'd recommend for folks, you know, who want to explore, who want to drive their own car and go out, you know, head out to the Route du Cider. I would recommend 2 different regions of Normandy. Go out to that Route du Cider and make some stops along the way. Do a little bit of research, you know, what they want to do to kind of stay in that area. I haven't stayed right in the town of can you help me with the pronunciation of that town? How would you say that in French? Cambremer. Oui. So that is an exquisite little town. There's, you know, little cheese museums to experience. You could go to Pierre Route. That's a cidery there. They're open their tasting room, and right behind that cidery Pierre Route is a beautiful garden, and it's open to the public. It costs very minimal. It's just right up the hill behind Pierre Route, the cidery.
So the cidery is Pierre. How do you spell the last name?
Huet. Yeah, and so right in that town, you're right there. There's places to get food. You could find Airbnbs. Nice bed and breakfasts. That's a nice region.
How big is the town of Cambremer?
Population, I don't know specifically. For me, going in, it's just a quaint little town. It's not like Lisieux. Lisieux is much larger. They have large hotels there.
Yeah. And
kind of bustling. But Cambremer is a very quaint and small.
I'm looking it up. Oh, yeah. It is very small. It's under 2,000 people.
Yeah.
It is cute, though. Very cute. Oh, it's got this little church and a manoir and a couple of churches. Yeah, it looks like a very quaint little town. But I mean, and Simone Weil had a house there. Simone Weil is a very famous French politician. I see.
So right in that region, you know, you have some very fine producers. Another producer I'd recommend is Domaine Dupont. That's spelled Dupont. And the interesting story about that domain is that the great-great-grandfather was able to buy that estate by selling Calvados. So, you know, Calvados is a commodity, and that's how that family was able to acquire Domaine Dupont way back when. And now, so many years later, they're world-renowned. They have a wonderful tasting room and fantastic Calvados, and they are pretty innovative with their cider. I've had Jerome Dupont who unfortunately left us too early at the age of 48 in last August of 2018.
Oh.
But he traveled the world, and was a real major force behind innovation for cider. But his father is still there, and Etienne Dupont, and that's an exquisite cidery. Highly recommend it. It's probably the one that people in the cider realm in the U.S. always want to go to Domaine Dupont, and there's a good reason for that.
Huh. Yeah, and I don't purchase a lot of cider, but I don't remember ever seeing that brand. So they probably have a fairly small production, I would guess.
Well, they're exporting a lot worldwide. Some of these, and that's true for a lot of producers. You might just be able to find their product at their tasting room. And you might be lucky enough to see the farmer if they're not out milking the cows. Or, that's the way it is. You kind of have to wait. And that's the fun of it. If you have time traveling in Normandy, if you're doing a tour, as you all know, you know you're going to meet the maker. They're going to have that time set aside.
Sure.
They're going to really be talking to people and leading you around, which you can't be guaranteed when you're just traveling solo. But, that's a benefit of traveling solo, too, is to be on your own, no doubt.
Yeah.
Another cidery I'd like to mention there is Pierre Jules, and that's P-E-R-E, capital J-U-L-E-S. And that's like a father and son team. They've been around for quite a long time, and they have a lovely tasting room, very nice product. They export quite a bit to the U.S., so any Americans listening will have seen their product. But there's nothing like, going to the location and drinking where the product was made, whether that's cheese or bread, or
right.
cider or wine.
Yeah.
Just tastes so, yeah.
So it's better at the source.
Yes, right at the source. So I like that region. There's a lot. There's the Route du Cider is really well marked on the roadway. It's easy to follow. 40 kilometers. You could just spend 2 days lazily going about.
Oh, so there's plenty of stops.
Yes, plenty of stops.
Okay.
And producers to find. So you'd want to stay somewhere close by. And Lisieux is really nice because it's a larger town. You have more options perhaps for hotels. And it's close enough where, it's a very minimal drive to find cideries. I mean, there's cideries really close by. See, on the map, it's like a stone's throw from Cambrai. Yeah. So that's a nice town. There's a large, if you want to be visiting churches, there's a large church there. I mean, like a kind of like a cathedral, nice restaurants to go to. But it wasn't a super attractive town for me. So this year on the cider tour, we're going to, instead of staying at Lisieux, we're going to Honfleur.
Yeah.
Just because it's so absolutely beautiful, and it gives you almost like a medieval harbor town sense. It's very romantic. There's cobblestone. There's like an old section, and you're right on the water.
Yeah.
And the reason why you have it on the cover of Join Us in France podcast, because
it's very
beautiful.
Scenic. It's extremely scenic, yeah.
And it's a good stepping off point for sightseeing. But allow me to just share with you one of my favorite cider makers, and she happens to be a woman, one of the few women, I should say, who are making cider and very successfully, is Agathe Lettier. And she's just outside of Honfleur, probably you just drive along the water there, and she's in the town of Pendepie. And her cidery is called Manoir d'April.
Okay, you're going to have to spell all of that. So I get that. But what's her last name?
Lettier, and that is spelled Letlier.
Latilier. Okay. All right.
She's fantastic. She's actually the vice president for the appellation and control in Normandy for all the Calvados. So she's highly regarded. She speaks English, and I love her cidery. She welcomes a lot of tours. But as you're driving up to her orchard, you're seeing in the orchard these giant pictures of cows that, it would kind of seem like, what the heck? That's kind of silly, maybe even kind of commercially, but she does it so eloquently. It really has that like feminine touch that invites you to drive into the orchard, up into the tasting room. We always do her Norman buffet, which she does for cider tours. It's a classic Norman buffet, a really simple food of cheeses and salads and some meat, all like fresh and farm. A really healthy meal with her cider, which is fantastic.
Yeah, because if you tell me Norman buffet, I'm expecting mussels and fries and crepes. So this is more very like different.
Kind of like a farm, farm experience, and it is unique, and that's why I always go see her on the tour. She's so funny and so inviting. And super knowledgeable, so she's not pretentious by any means.
That's great,
and she's a woman.
Yeah, and what's the name of the town again?
The town is called Pendepie, and which is kind of a fun town to say. And let me see on the map. I have it here. It's not spelled so way, but I'm going to try to spell it out for you. It's Pennedepe, and there's not really a town there at all. It's just a spot on the map.
Okay, and her cidery is called
Manoir d'April. So
Manoir,
like manor.
Yeah,
it's a small D apostrophe capital A P R E V A L.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you're spelling those out because I wouldn't have guessed. That's great.
Yeah. So Honfleur is lovely, and there is, what's interesting. There are some stores. Finding cider, other than going to the producers, can be a little bit difficult in Normandy, which might surprise visitors coming from the States because we're used to going to any package store or liquor store and finding a whole selection of craft beverages. But in Normandy, at least, you'll find wine, but you have to really seek out the cider. And so you could go to Manoir d'April, you could do that. And there is a store in Honfleur that has French products, so you'll see cider there. Mm-hmm. But another tip for listeners is that, and I love this, the national parks, gift stores in France, the national forest parks, like in Carouge, which is in Normandy, there's the Castle Carouge, which is lovely, has a visitor center. And in that visitor center, they have Norman products, and they have a whole bevy of cider products and Poiré right there. Who would think? Right?
Yeah. No, why not? That's a good place to have it.
It is, yeah. Yeah, we don't have that option. So Honfleur is kind of like in that region. You're now, if you go north, you won't find too much cider, but you'll find just enough kind of sparkle here and there. And actually, on the tour I'm doing in the fall, we're going to go up to the White Cliffs of, and I'm going to make a mistake of my pronunciation, but I call it Etretat. But I know you just did a podcast.
Etretat.
Yes. Etretat. Yeah. Yes, thank you. And just because it's so fantastic. So it's not too far from Honfleur. Okay. So that could be a nice station for people to stop. And the other thing I like about Honfleur, if by chance you're happening to travel with kids, right in the harbor there, you could walk to a Ferris wheel. And they have I believe it's there, all summer long. Mm-hmm. So it could be a place for both adults and if you have some kids, it could be a nice destination. Although I would recommend any parents traveling with children to really not build up your kids until that it's definitely going to be there, that the Ferris wheel is going to be there. But I've always seen, and that's kind of a nice addition to Honfleur. Yeah. So for me, that is like just to kind of think of if you had like 4 days, that's about all I would do without overtaxing myself. And certainly if you are driving yourself, that is a lot of cider to be tasting.
Yeah.
So maybe have a little sip, maybe sip and, you know.
So how many cideries would you stop at? Like in a day?
For me, in a day, I would probably only do like 3 cideries at the top if I'm driving alone.
Yeah.
When I'm leading a tour, we might do only 3 too, only because we're just there and we're getting such an insider's view. We're even able to drink more and not worry about it. And then we have like a refrigerator on the motor coach and we're drinking more. But that's the beauty of French ciders is you could drink a lot, but because of low alcohol, you're not getting tipsy. So you could do a little bit more than the average beer, but you know that's really individual choice, and you want to be really careful on the roadway.
Yeah.
No doubt about
Yeah.
that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
The nice thing of cider in this region is you're doing the cider, but there's so much sightseeing, and of course we know that this is the 75th anniversary year for D-Day that's taking place. So it's kind of a busy time, certainly coming up in June.
Yeah, in a few days.
But all along there, yeah, right, like June 6th. There's all you'll start seeing, and if you're not used to seeing it might catch you by surprise. But you're going to start seeing bunkers and concrete things that were built by the Nazis, you know, to take over that site, and it's overwhelming if you haven't seen that before. And then slowly your eyes will adjust, and you'll start seeing more of it along the coast, and it's really a very powerful experience.
Yeah, they had fortifications all along the coast there. Yeah.
Yeah. So that region of Normandy is called Pays d'Auge, and I can't help but want to mention to the listeners that just the southern part of Normandy is a different region, and although they make cider, they're renowned for their poré, which is made with pears. And their trees there some of them are over 300 years old.
Oh, wow.
Which is just insane. So I really recommend to go down to Domfront, to go, you just drive south from Honfleur. You could go through Conques as you've been there. It's kind of, it's a big city.
Conques, right?
But yes, Conques.
Yeah.
Yes.
Conque?
No, Caen.
Oh, Caen. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, Conques is like in the south. I was like, what? Okay.
My pronunciation is not so great, but I can. It's enough to get through, which is good.
Yeah.
In February of 2020, they're going to have a World Cider Expo in Conques. That is the first time ever taking place, and that's over what we would consider Valentine's Day weekend. They're going to have one day open where you could go and kind of like a beer fest or having a cider fest there. So that's really neat. It's called the World Cider Expo. Yeah.
Nice.
Not that it's the nicest time to go traveling in February.
No.
But
probably that's going to be a lot of locals,
Yeah. Though they're opening it to the world market, so they're hoping to have some international travelers, and I'm hoping to get to that too. But just south of that is it's kind of like a very large town. They might consider it a city, but that's called Domfront, and that's now you're in the heart of the pear country, and it is a majestic landscape. And unlike Pays d'Auge, where there's producers who are a little bit more businesslike, the producers in Domfront, they're farmers. By and large, they're kind of a small group of people, and they make Calvados a little bit different. It's made with a base of poré versus up in Pays d'Auge is made with cider. And most people in the world have no idea about this region. And it is, if you've never tasted poré, it's a little bit more delicate than cider. It has a different tannic structure. And these pears that grow there grow nowhere else in the world. And frankly, it's like my destination to always go to that region. And there is a Route du Poré too. There's a Musée du Poré. Actually, my group that I took there last year, we were the first Americans to ever do a tour there. So it's not really been explored.
That's
they've
great,
just
though.
rebuilt it. Yeah, I know. It's fantastic. It's just a fantastic region, a really friendly area. And they're different. They're different kind of farmers who are pear farmers versus
right, because
the cider
poiré just means it's like cidre, but made with pears. Poire is a pear in French. So it's, why not? You can make similar products with the pears as you do with the apples.
That's right. And so there's a little bit of sightseeing too that's really worthwhile. You know, the Musée du Poré, Domfront is, you know, a big town. There is Airbnb to stay at, and I think I sent you a link to one Airbnb that I recommend.
Yes.
Michel Darget. I've had him on my podcast. He I think he was a colonel. The house is like from, I don't know, 1100 or something. And if you're lucky enough, you could have, you know, pay to have him make you dinner, which he cooks everything. He gets all the food from a local farm, and it's all cooked in poré or cedar. That's also from that local farm. I mean, you can't get more traditional and local food than that. And he's wonderful, just a wonderful person.
That sounds like a nice person. Yeah, I'll try and I'll put the Airbnb recommendation on Join Us in France. The thing is, with Airbnb, you never know if it's going to be available. I mean, check it. Maybe it will be, maybe it won't be.
Right. So if that isn't available, folks could go up to kind of, and this is a very big tourist town. It's Bagnols de l'Oreille. That's
Bagnols de l'Orne?
Yes, thank you.
Bagnols de l'Orne. You have me in hot sweats, man. I don't know what you're saying.
But you had it.
I need to give you some tutoring for French pronunciation. You need that.
Oh, I know. You know, it's hard. I've been in different countries, and I'm supposed to learn Dutch, and then, you know, now I'm trying to learn French, and yeah.
Oh, I can't help you with Dutch at all.
The thing about that town is there's a lot of places to stay, and there is one particular Hotel de Gaillac. They have two hotels owned in that town, but that one's right in downtown. It has a bar and it has a small shop. It's not open on the restaurant's not open on Thursdays, nor is the small shop. But if you get there any other time of the week, they have a cider on tap that is not really marked other than saying cider, but listeners should know that cider being poured is being made by one of the most famous cider makers coming out of Normandy, and that's Eric Bordelais, who was Paris's top sommelier for many years until he went back to his family's farm in Normandy and is now making cider there. And
so Eric, what's his last name?
Bordelais. It's spelled B-O-R. I better spell that. B-O-R-D-E-L-E-T.
Okay. Bordelais, you said it right.
Yeah. That's
you can say you're saying Domfront right as well. So you're not saying everything wrong, just a few.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you. That means a lot to me. Yeah, so that's a great hotel tip. And their little shop, they also sell cider products there too. You could even get mushrooms, dried mushrooms, local mushrooms that are, gourmet mushrooms to bring home too.
Yeah, there are mushroom farms in that area as well. Yeah. Yeah,
so that's fun. And that town is known as, you might see a lot of senior citizens because there's not hot tubs, but hot springs there.
Yeah.
Not as we like in the Pacific Northwest of the U.S., but people go there for health regions, and that's a nice destination to get a hotel and to. There's even a casino, so if you want that kind of stuff.
Oh, that kind of place. Okay, we have those in the Pyrenees as well. where there's a little casino for gambling, and there's the hot springs and the thermal baths and the hotels and the things. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's just so much in this region, and cider now is starting to go in full swing. They're noticing what's going on in the rest of the world. I think the French have been kind of insular, but now they're reaching out. And what's really great about going there is by people visiting, you might actually help save an orchard or a 300-year-old pear tree, because these farmers, like a lot of farmers, don't necessarily get to pass on their farm to the next generation because their kids are going off to other places. They don't see cider as sexy yet. And hopefully that will change and people come back and preserve this landscape, which is so unique for France.
It's very true. Cider in France has this quaint kind of image. You eat cider, you drink cider when you go to Normandy and Brittany and the Basque Country, and it's for festive activities, but it's not something we buy. I think I do have a bottle of cider in my wine fridge, so but you have 50 bottles of wine and one of cider, and you don't really. We don't consume that much of it, which is too bad because it is very pleasant. It really is.
I think that's going to change, and now there's actually a restaurant in Paris called Pommes, Pomze. They were just awarded a Michelin bib, and it's a total cider-centric restaurant.
Oh.
It's actually the last night of our tour in Paris. When we return to Paris in September, we're going to have our final cider dinner at Pommes. And so you want to have seen that a couple of years ago in Paris, a cider-centric restaurant like that.
That's true.
It just couldn't do.
That's true.
Yeah.
So tell us the dates of your upcoming cider tour and where people can go read about it and book it.
Thank you for asking. That tour is going out the last week of September, so it's the 22nd to the 29th.
Okay.
Sorry, the 22nd to the 8th of September.
Okay.
And it starts and ends in Paris. And they could just go to the Totally Cider page at ciderchat.com, and they'll find a secure link for reservations and more details. And they could always contact me directly for any info.
Right. And I'll put this link in the show notes on joinusinfrance.com as well, so that people can easily find you. This is something that, this is not something I would ever have thought to do. Honestly, it's like really original. It's taking people to parts of France that are not super popular, that are not super famous, except for Honfleur, obviously. That one is like, yes, very popular. But the other ones, no. All the places you've mentioned are, low-key, very, very French. Like very, very French. So that's wonderful that you take people to these places. I really think it's exciting.
It's a pleasure for me, although we are going to spend a night on Mont Saint-Michel this year, too. Because we visited it last year, but everybody said, I wish we could have spent a night at Mont Saint-Michel. So we're going to have a cider dinner at Mont Saint-Michel this year, too. And that's a big tourist attraction, as you well know.
Oh, yeah.
You've done some wonderful on that.
Yeah, we've done some episodes on Mont Saint-Michel. And my recommendation would be not to stay on the Mont Saint-Michel itself, but to stay off of it. I mean, you might have already made your reservations for the upcoming tour, but I prefer to go to one of the hotels that's where the bus, because you have to park and take a bus. Yeah. And I think those hotels are fantastic because when you're on the Mont Saint-Michel, you cannot see the Mont Saint-Michel. Whereas if you're off of it, you can take the bus up until, I think the bus runs till midnight or whatever. And even if you miss the last bus, it's easy to walk. It's like 3 kilometers or something. It's not that big of a deal. And it's totally flat and totally easy. But, you can see it. It's gorgeous from a distance. So that would be my recommendation, is not to stay on the Mont. Or for that matter, not to eat on the Mont either. But
yeah. Well, we got a lot of feedback from the group last year, and a lot of times people, just to see the water surround you, that wave coming in and to experience it, folks really, really want to stay there. So I said, let's offer it this year, and see what that experience is like. Because you could always walk a bit off the Mont Saint Michel.
You can.
And take that view. It's plenty of opportunity to do that, but to actually say that you stayed on Mont Saint Michel,
I know.
Everybody will like small little bags a night. We won't be bringing our luggage. It's going to be like, it's kind of an adventure, like pack lightly and go into the Mont Saint Michel and then wander around there.
You don't want to drag a heavy suitcase up there. You do not.
Yeah.
Even if you're healthy and strong, it's not a fun thing to do because it's all cobblestone and it's pretty steep. As you know, because you've been.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's beautiful, really beautiful.
Yeah,
worth a visit for sure. Yeah.
All right, wonderful. Well, we've been chatting for over an hour, my friend. Who knew there was so much to say about cider?
And I just started. I really appreciate your time, what you do with the podcast. I really recommend for folks to subscribe to Join Us on French. Join Us in France. It's wonderful. All the tips that you do, from landing at the airport, how to manage that, getting into Paris, the sights to see, even Notre Dame, even though that, we've lost and saw the fire, there's still so much to be gained. And what you bring out in your stories is fantastic. I really appreciate your work.
Well, thank you. I like to keep it real. My whole purpose was to rediscover my own country, but also there's so much just marginally relevant information about travel to France. There are a lot of blogs where people just tell you, as you know, because you're a podcaster and you have a blog, the best way to rank in Google is to repeat the same stuff that already ranks, right? You just do it better, a little bit better, and then you get to the first page. The problem with that is everybody keeps repeating the same information. And some of that is just what people want to hear, but it's not the best advice. And I am very passionate about telling people, French people never do it this way. And there's a reason for that. It's because we prefer to do it this other way. And I think it's valuable for people to hear that because they just keep doing the same trips with the same itineraries. So that's why I'm so glad you do this. It's totally different. It's great. It's awesome.
And you bring a great voice, Annie, because you've been in the U.S. You have a French perspective and U.S. knowledge, so you're really able to cross the borders and bring us all together. And that, I think, is such a strength of who you are.
Well, thank you so much. You're very kind. It's been a delight to talk to you, Ria, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And hello to all your listeners. If they come to France, we'll be happy to have them listen to my podcast as well, obviously, and ask me questions. That's what I do. I enjoy doing that sort of work.
Thank you, Annie, and I'd like to say à bientôt.
À bientôt. Yes, almost. Don't say the T at the end. À bientôt.
À bientôt.
Exactly. Au revoir. Thank you so much.
Au revoir.
Au revoir. Thank you, Andrew Crowder, Scott Toporek, Rebecca Stahl, Sarah Shamo, and Ali Rodriguez for pledging to support the show on Patreon this week. And my thanks also to all the other patrons who support the show month after month. Thank you for giving back. Would you buy me a coffee if we met in real life? Well, you can do that by supporting the show on Patreon for as little as $2 per month. You can also support at higher levels for custom help with your trip planning or French conversation or anything else that you need somebody who's French for. Visit patreon.com/join us, Patreon, join us, no spaces or dashes, to see the different reward tiers. And thank you so much for giving back. So now about the scam I mentioned at the beginning of the episode. Listener Kay from Portland sent in this warning. I hadn't heard about this yet, so I want you to hear what she wrote. So she was in Montpellier, in the southwest of France. She says, when leaving the Promenade of Pérou, le Promenade du Pérou, it's just a nice beautiful park area. Walking through a passage lined with trees, my family, the three of us, got splattered with bird poop. It was in our hair and on our clothes. Two people walking beside us, a young woman and a man, said they got some on them too and pointed to the trees and said it was birds. One of them had baby wipes and handed a few sheets to us to clean off. And one woman was cleaning my hair while the man was vigorously cleaning the poop off the back of my father's pants. Something about the situation seemed a little bit off. The poop was green and didn't have any white and smelled like Dijon mustard. Another woman appeared with wipes and kept wanting to help us clean each other off. This continued for a couple of minutes. The group of people looked slightly Spanish and spoke a little Spanish but broken English. We eventually parted ways. We later read online that the gypsies have a bird poop scam. This has been around for years, where they squirt you with a liquid mixture, including mustard or chocolate, and claim it's bird poop. And then they pick your pockets while they help you clean off. We later told our hotel desk clerk, who called the police to report it. Luckily, nothing was stolen. She says, I should have read more up on these scams before leaving on the trip, but I am thankful we can just use this as a learning experience. Yes, pickpockets have a lot of tricks up their sleeve. As a matter of fact, we did a whole episode about that. It's called How to Protect Yourself from Pickpockets in Paris. It's episode 154. Thank you so much for pointing that out, Kay. And if you hear or see of a scam that's new to you, let me know, because, knowledge, a little bit of knowledge will help a lot in a situation like this. Okay, big changes coming to the scooters, the electric scooters in Paris. You know, all these little electric scooters you see all over Paris these days. There's been a lot of complaints about them. And the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, decided to act. So right now, there are a minimum of 20,000 scooters in Paris, owned by 12 different companies. People who work for these scooter companies they say it's more like 40,000 scooters. But of course, these companies have an incentive to not be quite as straightforward as they should be about how many they have littering the streets, really. So it's a lot. Whatever it is, it's a lot. And these scooters cause accidents. It's new enough that we don't have a lot of data about that, but they are a big problem. So they're not all bad, you know, like we mentioned on a previous episode. Teenagers love them. So instead of making them walk, you give them a scooter and they'll be very happy exploring Paris on a scooter. Also, they are good because they get some cars off of the street. People who would have taken their car to go somewhere now take a scooter, and they pollute a lot less than a car, obviously. But the big problem is that they get dropped off in the most ridiculous places, and they cause people to trip and fall. Originally, those were supposed to be, you were supposed to drop them off anywhere where it's not a problem. Well, everybody's idea of a good place to drop off is not the same, so... And they're also an eyesore, I think, anyway. So what's going to happen? First thing, in the near future, there will only be 2 or 3 scooter companies allowed in Paris. And these are going to be the 2 or 3 companies that have the infrastructure to do this right. And that's important because it's a free-for-all right now. So you have a lot of fly-by-night organizations throwing scooters on the street just to see if they can make a buck. And that isn't right. We don't want that. That's awful. The speed limit of the scooters will be reduced from 25 kilometers per hour to 20 kilometers per hour. And that's good because they zoom up awfully fast. The thing I like the best about these changes is that they will have to be parked in a parking space. Not up against a tree where they fall, because it's just a couple of sticks, really. Not up against a building where they reduce the width of the sidewalk so much that they force people to walk on the road. That's true, especially in the Marais. Not outside of the metro entrance, because after a while there's so many of them that they pile up and it's like a mountain of crap near the metro entrance. So they will have to park them in a parking spot or get fined. Now, of course, what's going to happen is these scooters are going to fall on the cars and do damage to the cars that are parked nearby. Yeah, I don't own a car in Paris, so I'm not going to worry about it too much, but that is going to be a problem as well. But I think these are very positive changes, and I hope they get implemented quickly. There's been no date set as to when, but because they are going to boot out several of these companies, there's probably going to be a bidding process of, show us that you've got what it takes to run these scooters in Paris, and that's going to take a while. But I'm hoping for changes very, very soon. If you want to recommend this podcast to someone who is not a podcast listener, I recommend that you send them to joinusinfrance.com, because there they'll be able to read a summary of the episode and click on the play button. And of course, if they are podcast listeners, they already know about their favorite podcasting app, and they can listen on the go. All they have to do is search for Join Us in France. We are everywhere on all these podcasting apps everywhere. Send questions or feedback to Annie at joinusinfrance.com. Have a wonderful week of trip planning. Next week, I'll release an episode with Elise about the Ariège, again, back down to the southwest of France, to Occitanie, and it'll be a lot of fun. Talk to you next week. Au revoir. The Join Us in France Travel Podcast is written and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2019 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.